In David Graeber scholarship, there are two notable books, and these are the two books I've read of his: Debt the First 5,000 Years and BS Jobs. Uh, Debt the First 5,000 Years I mentioned in level 7 of this iceberg because it goes into the barter myth and explains why it's a myth and about credit has been the original means of exchange. And this book is interesting mainly because it shows how much of morality in society throughout time is based on the rules of whether how much debt is appropriate for somebody to take on, when do they have to pay it back, or even if it's right or wrong, whether they need to pay the debt back or not. Example would be like in Christianity that Christ is the Redeemer because his death is effectively paying back the debt of original sin. Many ancient cultures have had jubilees, like once every 7 or 49 years, depending on the culture, where all debts are forgiven and set to be wiped off the books. And basically, a lot of morality is based on debt and credit and whether people need to honor those debts and what does that mean for somebody's character. And his morality has revolved around debt basically for as long as civilization has existed. It's very destabilizing to the idea of getting rid of it entirely and just allowing everybody to forgive it, or that we could just print money to now to the point, like the MMT people would say, that debts don't need to be paid, especially government debts. So if the MMT people just say, oh, the government doesn't have to pay back debts anymore, what kind of message does it send down the ladder for businesses and consumers? And if we had a society that nobody would honor their debts, and we're starting to see this with some of the pandemic policy responses, which I'm not going to get into here, but just think about it from that perspective. A society breaks down to a certain point. Why would anybody ever trust anybody or ever issue a loan or ever finance growth if there's no honor in paying back your obligations? And also the US dollar is based, since 1971, is a debt-based fiat currency. The collateral for most banking systems is US government treasury bonds. Banks, their whole business model is on the movement of debt. And most companies are heavily levered, and a lot of consumer balance sheets are levered either through credit cards, car loans, or mortgages. So the result of all of this debt out there and replacing it with a gift economy, which David Graeber believes that basically the most productive people will just maximize the supply of everything they produce because they'll expect that people who maximize the supply of other stuff that they produce will just give it to them out of the kindness of their hearts. The world doesn't work that way. There still is the profit motive, especially as long as there's economic scarcity. But basically, historically, excessive popular indebtedness leads generally to unrest, insurrection, revolt, and the idea of dishonoring debt, I think, would ultimately lead to a permanent state of unrest, insurrection, revolt, which is a lot of the goals of the Marxist agenda, just because you need that kind of thing to basically topple down the existing economic structure. I think these communist types are more idealistic on how it would turn out than I would, but the great point of that book, though, is generally that how dependent debt is not just on economic transactions, but on moral beliefs and about roles in social class and roles in society, and how basically civilization revolves around debt and paying back obligations. Second book he is BS Jobs, which started as a paper that I caught on a website called Strike Magazine called On the Phenomenon of BS Jobs. And it basically is the idea that most jobs are meaningless and are a net harm to society, and they're psychologically destructive and adversely affects self-worth. They he also argues that there's a negative correlation between the visibility of somebody's job and how much they are paid. Like corporate middle management or a mutual fund manager, or a private equity fund manager, if they all disappeared tomorrow, nobody would notice. Yet those are some of the higher paying jobs in modern America. Whereas if all the garbage men disappeared, or all the school teachers disappeared, or police officers disappeared, it would be a much more material impact, even though those are generally less compensated. He classifies a lot of the types of jobs out there that are there just really to serve certain goals, whether to inflate the ego of supervisors or to manipulate existing unnecessary complexity in the society, or to fill people into a certain class and give them something to do. The examples, I'll probably argue that maybe a lot of HR jobs are mainly, and a lot of middle management and corporate, are basically places to put middle class, college degreed, educated professionals who otherwise would have no way to apply their education. I mean, I haven't really run a Fortune 500 corp company before, but I could see how you could probably trim an HR department by 50% and probably not miss a beat in terms of headcount. There's probably similar in other industries, and as a result, he argues, which is kind of surprising for somebody who would normally be a pro-government person on the left, that a lot of the regulatory society and the way the government structured our business culture is to maximize employment or to place people in certain levels of classes of jobs. And it's not just for middle class people. There are certain jobs that really are only there for lower class people to keep busy and upper class people to have their sense of upper class prestige. I don't really want to insult people's line of work here, so I'm not going to go into every example of this, but in general, I mean, you can easily argue that, and I've talked about this on an interview I did with Tobias Carlyle, that half of the jobs in the modern service economy really have no role and can easily be automated by software and are really only there to fulfill a social purpose. Like, there is political reasons that you would want to make your economy less efficient in exchange of social stability. It's more overt in places like Europe, where they literally have fake offices that people go to pretend they have a job. France is the most notable example of that. But you see, like, in countries where they don't have enough jobs for highly educated people, it leads to revolutions, such as Egypt and Tunisia during their Arab Springs, and basically the more historically, and the Russian Revolution 100 years ago. So basically, you have the more educated people who do not have a productive outlet, the more likely they're going to not blame themselves for their lack of market value, but they're going to blame a system, an economic and political system, for deceiving them, and they will fight and rebel to redistribute the hierarchy so that they get what they deserve. This is why you see a lot of revolutionaries and people on the far left are not like the working class that you would expect, but they tend to be educated professionals or college students who feel like they are undervalued for their intellect or their academic accomplishment. I mean, that's what this book is really kind of indirectly saying, is that most people's jobs out there probably do not add marginal value or enough marginal value for their pay, but they are there to fulfill social obligations. And he advocates the solution is just cutting the middleman of these fluffed jobs that probably shouldn't exist, and instead just pay all these people a basic income. And that would have probably the same effect, if not a better effect, because the market would be more efficient because you wouldn't have traffic from people driving to jobs they don't need to be at, or people who can have more time to consume versus producing. I think I've talked a little bit in my labor videos, but this is kind of going long just on Graeber. So I probably should do another video about the implications of UBI and whether it would actually be a positive or negative for the economy. My main opposition to UBI is not from a market efficiency reason. It's more from a morality reason. But as we've seen with some of these labor shortages during the pandemic, I don't think society's ready at the level for Graeber's solution in terms of the degree of automation. We're seeing production bottlenecks due to paying people not to work around the world. So it's an idea that is out there, but it's probably too early for its time. And the combination of this and the ideas on debt the first 5,000 years, you could see why people would find in the establishment, even the establishment you'd think would be more left-leaning friendly, they would find these ideas dangerous because they disrupt existing power and social relationships, and also the business world and the tax structure and a lot of other things that people rely on is based on a certain expectations of people being employed and working and having jobs that pay a certain amount to fuel the consumer society. If you took those away and just shifted it to a UBI structure, especially if you did it too early before automation technology can carry the load for this, if it can ever carry the load for this, it's very disruptive and would cause social unrest. So that's my theory, is that I think David Graeber has interesting ideas. Maybe I don't agree entirely with all of them, but they're very dangerous, potentially, and they are kind of the left-wing version of the anti-Fed narrative in a way.